Question of the day: what is your favorite co-op game? Full stop. It's a pretty big, open-ended question, but I want to know because co-op games are some of my absolute favorite games to play. And also, I'm a firm believer that co-op games are better to ease people into gaming because you are on their team. If you can avoid quarterbacking, which obviously is really not that hard to do, just let people play their game. But what's your favorite cooperative game? Let me know in the comments below what that is, because we are looking at I think it's a classic. Obviously, at this point, it came out 12 years ago. But this is the reprint, the second edition, or the newer edition, I guess, the revised edition. So it's not so much that it's changed, but it's more of a re-release, and they're putting together things and batching it differently. Because the problem is with a living card game is if you miss a run, well, you've missed that run almost. It's very hard to go back and get it. So the revised core set of the Lord of the Rings card game this is what we're talking about today. So let's talk about how LCG plays, what it is, what it does, if this stacks up against Arkham Horror and things like that right now. So here we are set up for 2 players. You set your threat based on your 3 heroes. We have 9, 8, and 12 is 29. You set that on here. Again, there is player elimination. If you get tossed out, you lose. You have your deck of cards. We're using 1 sphere type in this deck, but you could mix. The downside of that is certain cards can only be brought in by the certain sphere. So Brock Iron Fist here can only be paid for by resources from one of the heroes that shares his same symbol down here. So if you're splitting the deck, you couldn't use Aragorn to buy a card with a blue sphere on it, much like that. So that's our deck, that's our setup. You then have the quest that you're on. So we are on the very first one here, Passage Through Mirkwood. It's going to tell you which symbols you need to assemble in your threat deck here, which are right here, and they're all mixed up from those sets. Now that is the only downside of this game, is you do have to separate these symbols out afterwards. You can make it more difficult too by changing certain rings around these symbols. Some of them will have a gold ring around it. It makes it more difficult. So you set that up. Then you read the flavor text here, follow what it says, and there's also a Passage Through Mirkwood here. It says, Mirkwood Part 1. You're playing in campaign mode. Set up, put Mendor into play. If Mendor leaves play, the players lose the game. So he is right here in play. Also, it tells you how to gain him and how you use him, essentially. So he's a ranged archer that you have at your back. Goes in with the campaign, you can continue on. The beauty of this game is you can just pick a scenario and play it. You don't have to play in a campaign, although it's obviously more rewarding to do so. Start with 1A, then you've got 2A, 3A, 3A on the back there, because this is a chosen fork in the road. Read this, flip it over, do what it says, search the encounter deck for 1 copy of the Forest Spider and 1 copy of the Old Forest Road, then add them to the staging area, then shuffle the encounter deck. The staging area is an area in which you're going to see what's there to attack. It might be a land that you have to kind of quest through and get through. Again, a lot of the things in this are abstract, but you might be trying to fight through a rough land like the Dead Marsh or something like that. The point is, the staging area tells you what's going to happen soon. Certain enemies will be in the staging area. They will not engage you unless your threat is higher than their number on their card. So for instance, this is a 30. So our threat's currently 29, so that 30 would not attack us. You can also engage enemies in the staging area yourself, but we'll get to there in a minute. Let's talk through the phases. First of all, you've got the resource phase. You're going to gain resources, 1 per hero that you have, unless there's benefits that give you more. 1 per hero, so you'll have these laid out down here. They'll each gain a resource. The resources are used to buy cards. The cost on the cards you saw are in the top left there. So Brock is 6. But because we have all 1 type out here, we can use those to buy him. So you have that. You gain resources. You're going to draw cards. So you'll draw a card. You'll start with a hand of 6 cards. You can get a mulligan if you don't like it. Then the planning phase happens. Planning phase is when you're going to buy cards with resources and attach them to certain characters and get ready for what's next. Then after that is the quest. You can assign characters to the quest. So this one, which I'll just show you the back of what it says, has an 8 right there. So you need 8 quest tokens on here to flip that over. Some of them might have special instructions as well, but this one you're going to need 8 quest tokens to flip it over. Whatever's in the staging area will add some difficulty. So this is a symbol you're looking for here. It's this one with a little Baradur on there. So it's 1 and then 3. So if these 2 were out there, you would have 4 that you have to come up against. Now what that means is the heroes you have committed to the quest need to, on this symbol here, be higher than the threat of the staging area. You'll then add quest tokens that are the difference between how much you succeeded and how much the difficulty was. So if it's 8 and you have 12 out there, you're going to get 4 quest tokens on here. Essentially, that's going to work for other things like damage as well later. So when you commit a character, you exhaust them, which means they're not going to be able to fight. Now, if you are unsuccessful in the quest, you'll raise your threat by the difference in the threat amount and then what you had committed, which if anybody hits 50 threat, they're instantly kicked out of the game. So the higher numbers you have here means that it's going to be quicker that you can be eliminated, but it probably means that your characters are pretty strong. So Aragorn having 12 is pretty good for him. Next is the travel phase. You'll have certain locations which you can travel to. Now the problem is, once you have traveled to a location, you have to do a location before you can do the main quest. So this location has a strength of 2 here. If you do questing, those points will go on here, not the quest, which makes it kind of difficult, so you need to get those out of the way. Then you have the encounter phase. This is where you can optionally encounter enemies who are higher than your threat level, but if they're in that range where they can attack you, they will engage your characters. When you do combat, you deal shadow cards. So essentially, let's say a bad guy's out here, it gets a shadow card too. Let's see, that's treachery. Here's a shadow one. Yep, Dolgador Orctors. So these guys are out here. You'll then deal a card. Now, if it has a shadow effect, it will add in this phase, the shadow phase. See how this one has a shadow effect? So you would put this down on top of here. You'll then resolve the enemy's attack. So this attack symbol versus your shield symbol. If it washes, great. If not, they're going to do damage of the difference. Then you'll attack, same thing, your strength versus their shield. They'll take the difference in damage. Then you refresh your players. Now again, you have to have someone who's not exhausted being in the fight. So if they're exhausted, it's going to mean, from questing, it means they can't fight. You'll keep doing that until you meet all the requirements of the quest. So this is a simple explanation of the very basic first mission, but the game builds and adds a lot more complexity as time goes on. Now we know there's a whole lot of other expansions and stuff that have come out in the 12 years since. This is the revised core set, which means that it's just the basics, as simple as it gets, and it will build from there. Campaign continues from there, and it'll tell you what to do if you're playing the campaign mode, how to keep going. So that is the Lord of the Rings LCG. First of all, I'm a huge Tolkien fan. I'm looking at multiple Tolkien books over there. There's the art, the illustrated world of Tolkien. I've got the Lays of Beleriand over there. I've got all sorts, right there. All sorts of, Tolkien lore. Tolkien Professor, shout out. One of the best podcasts there is if you love Tolkien. So I love this world. So art is naturally going to be one of those things I look at pretty quickly and see. I love the art in these games. Obviously the Fantasy Flight art, especially from the 2012 to 2020 era, or 2019 era, I guess, was just top-notch. I don't say top-notch as if it's not now, but it really, really, really was noticeable. There was a certain style, and they just knock it out of the park every time. So the Lord of the Rings art in these games is just as good. It's beautiful. Every card looks good. Just the design of the cards looks good. It all just works. So again, we're talking about an older game, but it just is absolutely beautiful. Each card is a piece of art. So that's what the game looks like, and admittedly, since this is a card game, you are looking at a lot of art with art design, so that is something you're going to notice, is the art looks incredible. Now, as far as how the game plays, this one, it's funny because when I did the review originally, I want to say I talked about Lord of the Rings versus Arkham Horror, and I gave the nod to Arkham Horror at the time, but ironically, I've played less Arkham Horror than I have Lord of the Rings. And maybe it is the simplicity, maybe it's the more abstract feel of the Lord of the Rings LCG, the different phases and going through them, than it is that Arkham Horror has a more, almost like playing Mansions of Madness without a board, right? So there's something about it. But at the end of the day, this is one of the best 2-player to 4-player co-op games there is, because, again, people are familiar with the lore. It's not that hard to teach the rules because your cards do a good job of explaining, but so do the 3 symbols. I mean, you really don't need a ton of backup and backstory. You're not reading a bunch of player powers. You're not trying to learn, okay, well, what is this combo with this? It's pretty straightforward. In this phase, you can do this. In this phase, you can do this. Where it gets tricky is that the game is very hard. And I know I sound like I'm doing a review of like Bloodborne, the video game, but the game is hard and it can punch you in the face and grind you up sometimes. Now, some missions are easier than others, but because it's a card game, you cannot be reliant on pure skill alone. You have to be reliant on, there's a little luck base, and man, I really need this card to come out. And if it doesn't, you just won't survive. And that is the nature of card game especially co-op ones like this, is you just cannot get the card you need to really survive, which is why the strategy is you get better and better at doing other decks, deck building and things like that. But if you don't want to do deck building or any of that, the starter decks in this are very straightforward and very good. Plus, it gives you some advice on if you want to splice two styles so that you have access to both, maybe a fighter and more diplomatic for quests and things like that. So all in all, if you're looking to get into a card game, especially a co-op, but especially one with an IP like Lord of the Rings that's already very popular, this is a very good card game. It's one of the best co-op games out there just because of how good it is. It's also one of the best solo games out there. This is a phenomenal solo game. I've played this almost exclusively solo because it's just that good of a solo game. Again, it can be angering at times, but it is just a beautiful game. It's a fun game. It's exciting. It's great to kind of dig through the narrative, and I like how this combines it to a little bit more cohesive with the boons and things that you pick up between each mission or scenario or whatever they're called. But big fan. If you want to try this, I highly recommend it. You will not go wrong on this. I foolishly got rid of my original edition a few years ago, and ever since then I've been trying to get it back, and I haven't been able to and hadn't found a good way to get it back or easy way to get it back. So very glad this is back in my life. Love Lord of the Rings. Love Lord of the Rings card game. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out now. I'm Bryan Drake here on the Dice Tower. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, etc. Dice Tower Bryan. Until next time, we'll see you.